Happening now, we'd like to welcome our viewers from across North America and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room, episode 113 for November the 7th, 2018. I am Wes Fryer, even though I'm sporting the Beefaroo shirt, which I'm sure so many people know what that is from, section, I think, maybe Western Illinois, something like that. We have some folks that are much smarter and much better dressed on the show tonight for sure. I am coming to you from Oklahoma City, where I am the director of technology at the Cassidy School, and we've been enjoying lovely fall weather, although it is just starting to get a little bit colder, and I think the rains are coming back. So anyway, it is, I actually moved my backdrop here, which was the remnants of Halloween candy. So we were off last week, and anyway, of course, there's always a lot of stuff that is happening. So with three of us in here tonight, we, there's even more articles to talk to than usual. So let me throw it up to southeast to our special guest from Texas, welcoming Jason Kern. Jason, tell us where you're at and what you're up to these days.
Hey everyone, I am Jason Kern, and I am the Assistant Head of School for Innovation and Learning at All Saints Episcopal School in Tyler, Texas. Fortunately, I'm still at school, so I got to be the better dressed because I definitely could not be the smarter of the three of us. So that was my choice there. So we are a 3-year-old through 12th grade school out here in Tyler, and so this is my second year here after 20 years at the Oak Ridge School in Arlington, Texas, where I did everything from coaching to teaching to director of technology, modern learning, all that different kind of stuff, and had an opportunity to come out here with somebody that I worked with for 19 years at Oak Ridge, who's the head of school out here now. So we're having a lot of fun. We spend a lot of time focusing on authentic learning is really kind of our focus out here. And that goes everything from the largest on-campus learning farm in Texas. We've got 20 raised plots where our second through fourth graders are farm field hands, and our first graders are chicken farmers, and all the way up to a brand new Center for Innovation 2 years ago that includes a virtual reality room, blended learning room, entrepreneurial cafe, digital studio for broadcast. So we're having a lot of fun and trying to bring hands-on real-world learning to students, and that's our focus.
That is fantastic. Well, I saw you had dropped a bunch of VR virtual reality articles, and so I'm sure we're gonna go there tonight. We also want to go up to Missoula, Montana, where if it wasn't a global tour, it at least took him to North Dakota. Welcome back, Jason Neiffer.
Hi, Wes. It is great to be back here. I feel like I need to reintroduce myself to the show, but my name is Jason Neiffer, and I am the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school, which is housed on the University of Montana campus in fabulous Missoula, Montana. And since we often talk about the weather to begin the show, Wes, it started snowing here. So 36 hours ago, we had about 4 weeks of kind of dreary, cloudy, gray day weather here in Missoula. And yesterday morning, I awoke to a winter wonderland here in Missoula. So the winter is here. And it's true, I've done a lot of traveling the last 5 or 6 weeks or so. The majority of it was in far northeastern Montana, so far northeastern that it actually made more sense to travel first to North Dakota and then back into Montana to visit a number of wonderful rural schools in Montana. And then between everything else in life, I may or may not be buying a new house and all sorts of blah, blah, blah is intervened. But I'm super glad to be back. And if for no other reason, then I have a reason to not feel guilty about, digging through an extraordinary amount of technology media. And there have been some cool things that have happened in the 2 weeks since the last episode. So I'm looking forward to talking about those things tonight.
Absolutely. Well, shout out to Peggy George, who is there in our chat room. And if anyone is joining us live, we definitely want to encourage you to check out our live chat. I am actually going back to my MacBook. So the wife is on her MacBook Air that I've usually borrowed with a little better processor there. So hopefully we'll hold out okay in terms of the hosting, but we'll try to give voice to any questions that Peggy and others may have. And we want to also definitely mention at the top of the show that our show notes are available at edtechsr.com/links, where you'll find the embedded Google document that has far more than we will have time to talk about in the next 50 minutes, 55 minutes. We were a few minutes late starting, so we'll probably go a few minutes after the top of the hour. So, Jason Kern, where would you like to begin tonight with our discussion?
Well, I mean, I have several things that I was interested in from the stuff that you guys put in, but one of the things that I've read lately that's really interested me is this ASU, Arizona State University, going to an online biology class offering virtual labs with a partnership with Google. So I don't know if you guys have seen that, but it really, they started out obviously in virtual education. You know, as you think about science classes, one of the limitations is how are we going to do labs? How are we going to do dual credit? How are we going to do, these type of education, but not have that lab component, not have that hands-on component? And they really jumped out there and put with Labster, put on some great offerings through virtual reality. And allowing students now to go through these labs, and we've been fascinated with virtual reality and done some stuff there. We actually started 2 summers ago, and we went to the biggest experts we could find, which happened to be 9th grade students who were really into this. And as we were building our Center for Innovation, they were like, we really want to have a virtual reality lab. And we were like, well, we don't have the budget to build the kind of virtual reality computer we're in a need, and the headsets and everything. And they were like, well, we can do that. And so actually my first day on the job was taking 2 kids to computer parts store here in Dallas. We picked out all of the parts. Well, they picked out all the parts. They brought it back. They built the entire computer. They constructed the whole VR lab. And to see how passionate these kids are about virtual reality and the possibilities that it has is fascinating to me. I certainly don't think it's at the point where it's going to replace anything. I think another one of the articles we put in there was about how it's a supplement to great education, right? It's got lots of potential. It's got ideas down the road that I think, will open up bigger possibilities, but right now it's a fantastic supplement to really engage kids and to kick off units and to really give them relevance of, why do I want to learn this? Why does geography matter? Well, it matters a whole lot when you're trying to show somebody around on a virtual tour of Paris talking about cultural aspects, and you've got a classroom or virtual lab set up where we have a class sitting around a student actually utilizing the virtual reality so they can actually be instructing that student. Well, this is where you want to go. Oh, remember, it's over there, that type of thing. And so having those possibilities, and then just from the other side, having the kids thinking about the programming and the computer building and the problem solving. Right now we're trying to, our kids took on the challenge to build a dual headset environment off of a single computer, which only a couple places that I know in education are doing that, MIT being one of them. I don't know many, if any, K-12 schools that actually have a setup like that. And watching these kids problem solve through that real world, idea of how we can actually make this happen. We know theoretically it can happen, but how are we going to make it happen? And they thought, oh, we can build a server, we can run virtual desktops, it's going to work great. They get it together and they're like, okay, it's not working the way they thought that was going to. And once again, what I love about this is these aren't even kids in a class. This is 100% student driven outside of class. So how can we find engaging things like this, or just things that kids are passionate about in virtual reality? I think is one of those ideas right now, and let them run with it and then bring it into the classroom. Students, they actually are the ones that the teachers go to and say, hey, we want to bring our French class in and tour around Paris because we're talking about the Eiffel Tower and some of the culture there. And the students then get with the teachers and they run it. And then there's a great student-teacher partnership. So it's just one of the things that we've found just really taken off at our school, and then just seeing the possibilities all the way up to higher ed and all the way down to lower school when they're doing the traditional state project and they want to go see monuments of their state, and you can actually take them there and see it. And we all know the value of going on a field trip. Well, we can't take a field trip to every state in the union, but we can now with virtual reality, right?
Man, I'm thinking Ready Player One. I just love that movie, and then I read the book too. Jason,
Yep.
Are you guys thoughts on this? And is the Montana Digital Academy touching VR for labs or those kind of things yet?
It's a great question. We've had a long time. Fascination is probably a strong word, but we've certainly been keeping a close eye on the development of these technologies. And one of the reasons why that's the case is because we do think that we can recreate lots of things in the face-to-face environment in an online environment. For example, like if you're trying to teach the core skills of what a science lab is about, we've had teachers that have run labs on video and provided data. We've had some that have mimicked labs locally with local supplies, and we have a lot of strategies that meet the standard, I guess, or allow students to have enough of experience to say that they are ready to do something in a future class, prepares them for the future. But I think that lacks a lot of whimsy. And so for us, I think adding in the virtual and augmented reality component will at some point be a big deal for us. The biggest problem we run into in our model is because none of our students are local. They're all distance students. We serve students in 200 plus high schools in any given semester across the state of Montana. And something that we'd like to mention about Montana is that it's big. It's a very large state, and so it's not as easy to get kids to go even to regional centers to grab equipment. But I'm hoping that standardization of equipment becomes a bigger part of the market in the upcoming 2 to 3 years. One of the things that's been kind of annoying about the distraction of Facebook and their shenanigans is that they have a huge VR play that is very much part of their mix, and they've announced new products in the last several weeks that are starting to diminish the hardware requirements for things like virtual reality headsets. And I can't remember, it's not Oculus Go, it's some newer technology that they're releasing that has even a thinner hardware deck that comes along with it. At some point, that's going to make it a real reality for us, and we're very excited about that content. I feel like bandwidth is becoming less of an issue there. I feel like producers are starting to come up with a lot of interesting, in some cases, free content for folks in that arena. We just need hardware prices to go down a little bit so it's not an unreasonable ask to have that equipment available in a variety of schools across the state. But ASU is doing interesting stuff. Not only are they an incredible provider of distance learning college courses, they've been really making a play for more high school offerings in the past couple of years. And in fact, I have a sales rep that is kind of continually badgering me in my email box to look at some of the interesting things they're doing in the K-12 arena. So it's great to hear that they're going into, I think, this very fertile ground of science labs and experiential science through a virtual reality and an augmented reality framework.
Definitely. Well, one of the other articles that I think, Jason Kern, you put in was from EDUCAUSE, which I had a chance to actually go to that a few years ago. And I think it's probably still the preeminent, EdTech for higher ed conference. Lots of cutting edge stuff. I got in on some really cool badge things that I've continued to learn about, but it was talking about, universities and how they're trying to spur and encourage faculty innovation around that space. And I definitely think that transformative level is what's most important. I'd be interested. I know Nearpod, they mentioned in one of those articles, they have a lot of content for K-12. I think Carl Hooker, who was on the show a while back, had I think talked about that a little bit. So I don't know. Our experience as mine has really been a little bit more of just the gee whiz, here's something in virtual reality. I think that always happens with technology, right? It's new, it's glitzy. So we really focus on that technology. It doesn't become, until it's normalized, we tend to focus on the tech so much more than the content. We did try to use the Clouds over Sidra, UN 3D video that is about refugee camp in Syria. But there were technical issues, right? Even for students bringing their device, it's like multi gigabit, size for how big those files are. And so anyway, I did look last year at the possibility of renting some headsets, right? So you won't necessarily have to invest, in the whole thing, because also it's going to change so quickly. But like Jason said, I'm real interested in the platforms that are not going to be as heavy on the requirements in terms of outside desktop CPU. So the more we start to have the phones being able to process so much more, I don't know. It's an emerging technology, but it sounds like, Jason, you guys are really far advanced in terms of what you're already being able to realize. And that is pretty amazing, because I know the little bit that I've tasted of that at the Microsoft store, here in Oklahoma City. And then we had the ISAS Arts Festival, which comes every spring to our region. And one of the really cool things that was innovative were, students, again, like you said, who were passionate about that and had set up that as a demo area. But it's a taster, right? So are your students creating content yet, Jason, in Kern, in that environment, or are they still pretty much utilizing content others have created?
So we're really starting to try to build the idea of creating content. We've started out with fourth graders working with CoSpaces, which I know was brought up a couple shows ago, and really starting to build virtual worlds around, for example, what would this character do inside of this novel? And then looking at bringing Unity in the middle school to upper school level. And there's a really interesting platform called Playmaker, which, if you've programmed with Swift before with the wireframes and that kind of stuff, kind of makes it a little bit more accessible than a straight Unity programming platform that I'm really interested. Playmaker.
Okay.
And it's an add-on, so it looks like Swift and the little I've played with it, but it's something that we're really trying to build our programming program here. It hasn't been robust previously, and starting off with, really, I found Raspberry Pi to be a great introduction to programming, that physical computing aspect. I think that anything that kids can go beyond that conceptual, I think so much of programming gets bogged down, and sometimes like you're just watching this, very, ethereal idea instead of like watching something actually happen physically, or a character move across the screen quickly. And that's really, I think, an interesting piece that we're exploring is how can we go for a little bit lower entry, higher ceiling. And I think Raspberry Pi is offering that a lot. And I think that there's some elements in CoSpaces and Playmaker that hopefully will bring that virtual reality. Another piece that we did last year, I'm sure, Wes, when you were touring colleges with your son, you got those virtual tours of a campus that come in, and you build the Google Cardboard and put your phone in and watch a virtual tour of our campus. Well, we had a student get one of those last year, and was like, well, why don't we have one of these for our school? And I was like, I don't know, why do we not have one of these for our school? And so he went and figured out what he needed, and he went and pitched the idea. And so one of the things that we do here is really put it back on the student, say, okay, you want to do something? Well, come up with a plan, come pitch it to us, and we'll fund it. And so he came in and had some research, but wasn't quite there yet. And we said, well, that's a good idea, but I don't think you're quite there yet. And he came back and really had a great plan. And he actually built a virtual reality tour of our school last year, similar to one of those college campuses. So he picked some spaces on there. So we've dabbled into it. We don't have a really set out program. Once again, right now, it's a very student driven activity at All Saints.
Well, here's a segue to an amazing article from last week. Like, I would say this is one of the most amazing articles I've read in months. And this is how, and I don't have it, this is for last week, it's at the top of episode 112 on the show notes, How Humans Get Hacked. Yuval Noah Harari and Tristan Harris talk with Wired. And so part of what, they talk about is just our brains and how we're wired. And like for VR, for instance, right, we can totally buy into, even though you have a headset on and you're holding these paddles, your body, when you're standing, you think at what looks like the edge of a precipice, or looking outside you're like on top of the Sears Tower or something, and then somebody pushes you or whatever. I mean, our brains are very, very hackable. And the context of that article is really not just about social media, but in advertising and politics, but really how, saying that the political systems of Western democracy were built on very idealistic visions of how autonomously capable people are of making decisions, and that really we are so influenced and we're just not really aware of how hackable we are. So anyway, that's tied in with VR. And again, I'd reference Ready Player One. If anybody out there hasn't watched that, it's the Steven Spielberg movie. Just really, we've got Minecraft and of course now Fortnite, and there's things that have sort of eclipsed it, I think, for the students at our school, at least, some of the younger kids, where they're spending their time. But it's just pretty amazing the kinds of experiences which students can have today in virtual environments, and we are just rapidly being propelled down this road where that's going to become a big part of the world that we live in, is this virtual world that we can tap into. The oasis, if we're Ready Player One fans.
Yeah, come on. You gotta push the book, not the movie. Come on.
Okay, well, the book is a lot better. You can actually, my sister-in-law is a librarian, and I maybe had heard this before, but she said, "Oh, that's always what you got to do. You see the movie first, because then you're not disappointed, and then you read the book, and you're like, yes, this is the real."
Well, they're two totally different things, right? They it wasn't even the same story.
There was a lot of different twists. I enjoyed them both. I really enjoyed them both.
Yeah.
So. All right. Well, Mr. Jason Neifer, where would you like to take us next? We're not. I know we're not going to be getting through half these articles tonight.
No. Well, we weren't around last week to talk about the new Apple stuff, so let's talk about the new Apple stuff. I guess I'll start here, and I've kind of turned into our resident Apple naysayer, which is definitely not my intent. But the bottom line is that I feel like that Apple hasn't worked very hard for my business in the last 4 or 5 years or so. And for our guest benefit, I'm kind of Chrome guy now, so I'm joining tonight on a Chromebook. I use a Chromebook about 65-70% of the time, desktop at work, and I have an older iMac now that's starting to age a little bit that is my other computer, and then I carry a Chromebook with me. That's my engagement in the world now. And I have to say that of the 3 announcements last week, the most boring one for me was the new Mac Minis, although they are high end enough that you could pull one off as a desktop. One of the reasons why I left the flock with Apple was that I didn't feel like they had a Mac. I bought a nice Mac Pro in 2008 that was still in pretty good shape in 2013, 14, 15, and into 16. But there was no way for me to go from that to the $4,000 or $5,000 Mac Pro garbage can style thing that was around. But I got to say, all 3 of the products released last week are very interesting. And so for those that didn't keep a close eye on that, although you would have to eschew almost all technology press to miss this, new MacBook Air, 13-inch MacBook Air that utilizes the Retina display, which had been missing there, and moves to all USB-C connectivity as opposed to the previous connectivity. There is a new iPad Pro that is a USB-C iPad Pro that I think has really wonderful and I think modern-looking industrial design. And then there was a refreshed Mac Mini that I didn't watch the keynote address. I just watched highlights of it, but apparently it is much more renewed than it looks, even though it's the same basic form factor that it was before. So I got to say, I am not in a position to drop $1,400 on a MacBook Air. I am not in a position to drop $1,800 on an iPad Pro, which is the high-end iPad Pro with LTE and a terabyte of storage. Nor am I looking for a desktop computer right right now that need a Mac Mini. But I have to say, the next time I buy a tablet or a laptop, suddenly Apple is back, I think, in play. And the one article I do want to point out, because it's pretty interesting. I dropped in something from today's 9 to 5 Mac, and now that the iPad Pro with USB-C is released, the journalists are starting to do things like plug in all of the USB peripheral or USB-C peripherals that were previously off limits to Apple tablet products. And of course, it's a real mixed bag on what works, because that's the big bummer of USB-C, is that it's not nearly as universal, I think, as people dreamed. But this notion of having a beautiful, pretty well-designed tablet that's got that USB connectivity is pretty tempting to me. So, Wes, you're usually my counterpoint nowadays. As I start to ramble and rant about Apple stuff, what'd you think of last week's announcements?
Well, I did watch the whole keynote on Apple TV afterwards. That's kind of what I end up doing. In fact, I almost sometimes try to hide my eyes, from the news, so get a little surprise. I mean, the most amazing thing was this Photoshop file, which was like, I think it was 3 gigs. It was either 2 or 3 gigs. I think it was a 3 gig Photoshop file that they worked on that was on the iPad Pro that they had, connected to the full-blown monitor. And so, one of the questions we've talked about is, can you make that transition? Could an iPad, really become your daily carry? And at what point is that, will that be possible? So I think what it's going to do for us at school, I don't think we're yet ready to abandon USB, traditional USB. Okay. I mean, we've got regular flash drives. I just like the little MacBook, 12-inch that I'm on right now. It's got the headphone jack on one side and the USB-C on the other. And I've got, all the video adapters and whatever. You don't leave home without them, because you're not going to find many people that are walking around with those in their bag. I think it's still a bridge too far right now, because of the different platforms that we support, to make that jump to the new MacBook Air. But I do think that the capability of this new iPad, I think that we may, we're considering offering that as an option for our faculty. It's really been up to basically building principals, division directors, if faculty have wanted, or departments, if they wanted iPads. We haven't handed people 2 devices. You get 1 device, and that's been a laptop. But I think that it'll be interesting to see. We're on a 5-year rotation, so we've got most of the teachers in our primary division, our pre-K and kindergarten teachers, who are using Seesaw and doing a lot with, photos and using some video to communicate back with parents. So it'll be interesting, because that's, I think, a pitch that we're going to actually make next week, to give them a choice to say, hey, would you, like to think about making this iPad move, versus sticking with the MacBook Air. So I'm not going shopping myself, but we're, always in the refresh business for some devices. And so I think that is going to open that door. We are probably going to update our Mac Minis as well. Just a lot faster, more cores, that kind of thing. So how about you, Jason Kern? Where are you, by the way, on the whole Apple Chrome, Microsoft? Yeah, he's got them. He's got the adapters right there.
So I've got my adapters. I'm also a Google certified innovator. So I believe in both. I very strongly, actually. I think that I think what you guys all said is totally accurate. I can't add too much to that, but I do think there was an interesting article in the show notes about that Apple really kind of is positioning itself more as a luxury brand. And I think that is truly where they're going, is that you talk about, the iPhone that you can get into not really under $1,000 anymore. You've got a MacBook Pro that's going to cost you, $2,000. You got that iPad Pro that's going to cost you really. I mean, there's not that entry level piece anymore. I do think one of the things that we did this year is the low end iPad Pros. We bought about 60 of those this year to put in our lower school, and I think that's been a really nice entry point for those types of things. I think that just if I pick up a Chromebook, so we've got Chromebooks in 5th and 6th grade, 4th, 5th, and 6th were mandatory BYOD, 7 through 12, and then iPads in the lower grades. And where I was, iPads 4 through 8, and then mandatory BYOD. I just believe that the iPad is a more creative device, and it makes students and teachers skip the substitution augmentation layers and go to modification, transformation, or redefinition much more quickly. While it's not that you can't do great things on a Chromebook, because you absolutely can, but it's also easier for that teacher to slip into, let's take notes, let's write a paper, instead of, I'm going to toss out, let's show with media.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, shout out to the Atlas conference and last year, or maybe this was 2 years ago. This was in Burbank, California. Went to a session on one-to-one, and it kind of, I don't remember what the exact title was, but it's basically like one-to-one's gone bad. And a lot of what they said had to do with parent perception, but also teacher and folks that had gone iPad, and they're like, where's the keyboard? Why can't we just type on this thing? We just want to do a type and paper. It was a lot of folks kind of like that, and they were not focused on transformation. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens at our school, because we're, multiple Chromebook carts, especially at our middle division, and ideally, and that's one of the things we're talking about now, let's have a conversation about what do you want to do, and what do you want to create, and what do you want your students to do. And I definitely see where the Chromebook is so much more of, a comfortable, accommodating, like, yes, this just feels, like this. It makes me think of being at Texas Tech with distance learning and ITV. And I was guilty of saying this to faculty, like, you won't have to change a thing, when you come into the distance learning classroom, which is really not a good pitch, because there are things that you should adapt and change. And, if you're lecturing with the overhead projector and you've been doing that forever, I mean, that might not be great pedagogy in any context, whether it's face-to-face, if that's what we're doing all the time. So.
Yeah, it should never be about the device, right? It always should be about the learning goals and right. How the device amplifies those learning goals. And I think that when you define your learning goals, you'll define the device that most easily fits those learning goals at that time. So having a variety of devices is always going to be the best way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, I'm going to pick an article here. Oh my gosh. And there's so many to go to, but I'm going to go to this BuzzFeed news article. So this is called "This is How We Radicalize the World" from BuzzFeed News on October the 28th. And one of the things that's been great about doing the show with Jason is it does get me into so many different articles in preparing. And it is hard, and I'm not going to try to claim like I've done it or I'm doing it, but it's hard to connect dots. There's so many things going on with, AI and social media and elections and Russian hacking and, smart assistants in the home and all these different things. Well, Ryan Broderick, who is the author of this piece, has done a really fantastic job looking globally at the role in which basically technology has empowered fringe, outlier, and in many cases far right, leaders, and then enabled them to come to power. The article's not in the show notes, but there was another one I saw about how YouTubers in Brazil are really are running for office and are really political influencers. And folks are saying, we might see that same kind of thing here. But basically, he does talk about Sao Paulo, and that was a place where we just saw, a big election victory for a right-wing candidate. But he goes back to 2010, talking about, WhatsApp and Facebook users and Google controlling digital markets, and then the way in which that is played into they are current events, but, Russian troll farms, Hindu nationalists in India, Myanmar, and what's basically happened there with the Rohingya minority, and just a genocide, and certainly a mass exodus of hundreds of thousands of people. Fast forward to Donald Trump, the election here, Marine Le Pen in France. It's just, this is a tour de force of the globe. And I don't know for myself that I've been, stitching all those pieces together in terms of like, yeah, wow, look at how powerful these tools are, and look at what a challenge this, places free and open societies and democracies specifically, because these groups can really pull the levers of social media, and in some cases, in countries like the Philippines, and I think in Myanmar as well, like the name Facebook has become equivalent with internet. Like there's so many of those folks on Facebook, and then this is also speaking to the failure of Facebook to step up to policing their platform and recognizing when disinformation is being put out. And it's not just disinformation, like in some cases there have been lynchings that have happened in these small towns in India because people have fanned the flames about people coming to kidnap children, and then there's a lynching. So it's a real Wild West out there. So any thoughts there? It's a big topic, but I just want to commend it to everybody as it's just pretty comprehensive, because sometimes we'll have an article about Russia or an article about Myanmar, and this one really puts a lot of those pieces together.
I would just jump in to say that it echoes, conversations we've been having on this show for, almost, well, I guess 2 years, right? Because we have been going for some time now. And I think the really bottom line for me is that it kind of puts back the notion in my mind that we have to have a more comprehensive strategy for media literacy in K-12 classrooms. Like, we can't let this stuff be accidental. And in fact, there's another funny article that I'm not sure where I end up sticking this tonight, but this one from the Scientific American blog: we should teach media literacy in elementary school. And I remember reading the headline going, I don't think this is breaking news, right? I would argue this has been an argument we've been having in schools for upwards of 6-7 decades. But I think the article states, I think, a lot of broad themes that we have been absolutely repeating here on the show. But I think the article that you're pointing to, Wes, talks about what the stakes are for not understanding how these tools can tweak us philosophically, psychologically, emotionally. And, even in the last 24 hours, I'll tell you, there was a pretty funny video on Saturday Night Live on Saturday night. And then again, we're not a political podcast, but for those of you that hadn't seen it, it depicted Democrats like totally stressed out over the election. And we're like, it's going to turn out great. And they're shaking, and they're totally tense, and, please go vote. And that hit a chord for me, because that, mimics what I see a lot going on right now, that the very real implication of what has happened in the past 3 or 4 election cycles with social media is obviously a very real implication to us from a political standpoint, whether you agree with the current politicians in charge or not. And the only way we fix that, right, the only way we can do that is to give people the tools they need to use the tools appropriately and correctly. And so the more we can have those conversations in a real and meaningful way in schools, I think the better off we are. So, Jason, what does that look like in your district?
Well, and I think we have to move past having the conversation to putting students in actual situations where they're using it, right? So if you think about having down in our lower school, we have a green screen, and every day 4th graders put together the announcements, and then they lay in green screen behind them for what they're doing, and listening to them talk about media. They would never say that they took a media literacy class, right? But if you show them something and you ask them, well, where are they? They're going to say, well, I don't know. They could be in front of a green screen, or they could be in Paris. And they are already thinking about that because they've known how to manipulate that. I mean, how in a government class or a history class do we not pop up the Twitter from last night and say, okay, everybody go pick out a different person, and let's look at what they said about the election last night as it went through, and now let's analyze from 50 20 different aspects who can determine what really happened and who won and who lost. Because doesn't it matter who we follow and where we get our news so much more now than before, maybe, that says that this is the perspective? I mean, if you read one person's Twitter feed, you might have thought that there was a huge blue wave last night. And then if you read somebody else's Twitter feed, you'd be like, man, Trump was ecstatic with what happened last night. And how do we mitigate and decide where we go in there? And if we don't put them in that and help them build their network and understand what they're looking at, and are they putting themselves in an echo chamber? We can talk about media literacy all we want, but we've got to have them actually experience it.
And it's so important that that is for the adults as well, right? I mean, we won't recount the specific stories, but we've had several things happen recently with adults and social media, and so it is about choices of things that we share, but it's also about how we filter our feed, and the understanding that the algorithms are really shaping what we're seeing, and so how do we become proactive about that? And so, yeah, I think the coding and all that stuff I was going to mention earlier, Jason Kern, when you talked about getting to move from abstract to the real in terms of coding, like I think that's constructionism. So that's Seymour Papert and Mitch Resnick, MIT Media Lab, or Media Lab Lifelong Kindergarten Group. They're talking about how, it's different when you really build something and it's a physical manifestation. So like this stuff has got to become core. And I totally agree that it needs to be in the mainstream curriculum. And that's why integration is so important. And that's why bringing in, these kinds of real-time feeds, and then, being able to find ways to develop computational literacy and coding, and then seeing, we need, here's a real plug. Okay. We need smart folks of all ages to really help figure out how are we going to do democracy in the 21st century, right? With AIs coming online and with all this capability, with what do they call it? Deep fakes, right? These videos that if you've got a lot of video of, let's say, a president or someone else, it could be anybody, we can make them say almost anything, and the videos are going to just become more and more realistic. We've got some pretty challenging things, and I don't think that these were not solved by these midterm elections. They're probably not going to be solved, by the next round of presidential elections as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the media literacy and the things that our students are going to have to deal with, you guys have been podcasting now for 2 years, right? So I could probably find you saying every word that I'd need to say. Go take what you've said and overdub it onto a video of you guys and make you say whatever I want you to say.
That's
right?
Kind of scary. Yeah, because it's all on YouTube. It's all on YouTube, right, in HD.
So I mean, it's a strange world we live in, and we can't turn our back to it. And one of the articles that's in our show notes is what the Times got wrong about kids and phones.
Can you talk about that and talk about that author? Because I think she's a key person we want people to know about.
Yeah, I mean, Art of Screen Time author, and I always mispronounce her name. Going back and trying to find it. She wrote The Art of Screen Time. What is her name, Wes? Anna
Kamenetz.
Anna Kamenetz. And she talks so much about, that the premise of the article is that the New York Times came out in the style section, wrote these articles espousing the idea that the biggest people in tech don't let their kids use tech, was basically be like Steve Jobs and keep your kids away from tech. And I think she does a great job of saying that's such a missed opportunity. She goes into a lot of the reasoning behind how that's really not even true, and she lays it out. She talks a lot about if we have that stance, we're also talking about people that have the means to put their kids in activities that can keep them out of tech. One of their arguments was that, well, their nannies look after, police their tech screens. Well, for most people, having a nanny is not even possible, right? And so are we disenfranchising other people by suggesting that if you have tech, that's a bad idea, instead of really the gist of her argument is sit down with your kids, learn about what they're doing, talk to them about what they're doing online and digitally, and understand. And that's going to strengthen your relationship with your children, and it's going to make them more tech savvy and more understanding of the world that they live in. And so I just thought we can't go back to the just say no. We know that just say no didn't work. When we were talking about drugs and Nancy Reagan, it proved out over time that wasn't a strategy, and we can't do the just say no strategy with screen time too. We have to be intentional, and we have to take the opportunity to say, hey, what are you doing with that screen? Are you consuming? She talks about the stats of, students are spending, she has, I can't remember the demographic, but they're spending 3 hours a day consuming technology. And if you go back to when I grew up, that was about the same amount of time that people are watching TV. And yet we think this huge problem that's different. It is different. I mean, don't get me wrong. It is a different world. It is a different problem. There are different situations, but it's not as different as we like to think it is all the time. I mean, MTV was going to ruin the world, right? And so I don't know if you guys watched the CNN 80s and 90s documentary series on Netflix. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I've seen some of the 80s one.
Yeah, and when you're watching them, you're like, man, I forgot how MTV was going to ruin the world. And I forgot, some of the misconceptions that were held at the time. And it was good for me to remind myself that I think every generation looks at the generation before them and says that they're ruining the world.
The world's going to heck in a handbasket. Yeah,
exactly.
It was Elvis gyrating his pelvis, on television when my mother was, in high school.
And I think the big thing that I take out of it is we need to have conversations with our children and with our students and truly help them navigate the world that they're in, because while they may be tech savvy, they're not necessarily ethically and morally savvy on what's going on, and that they can't be at 12, 13, 14, 17. That's part of our role is how do we use this technology really well. And I think that the screen time new report from Apple is really interesting. If you have students or children and you're not sitting down and having a conversation about what that says, not in a accusatory way. And also let's not pretend that we're not culprits of this either. I mean, I think if we all sit down and say, here's mine, here's my screen time, what's your screen time, and then have a discussion about it, that's where we're going to accomplish really having great kids and great understanding.
Yep. And I would definitely echo the notion of kind of adults being honest with kids about it. I think one of the problems I have sometimes of the kind of over preachiness about the domination of tech is that, and we had some articles on this earlier on in our podcast run about how if you look at objectively the amount of time spent with devices, adults are way worse than kids, and in a lot of cases have worse social mores developed, so that because kids will sometimes, not always, I think they could use more guidance here, but kids will sometimes develop rules related to that, recognizing that they're not going to be able to, pay close attention to something off their screen and have unlimited screen time, and so they got to figure out a way to kind of get that engagement back and forth. And I'm glad this article was kind of a response to the New York Times article, and
actually three. There was a 3-part series that she did in the Times.
That she did in the Times, or this is the other one?
It was the response. She was writing the response to that 3-parter. Yeah.
Well, and this notion of I like the digital gap piece of this, right? Because that's something that has been the original digital gap was, of course, device access, and then this is now that somehow we've gone in the wrong direction, and I think that this kind of all or nothing thing is what I think sometimes really makes it really tough to talk about this, because I don't think it's all or nothing. In the same way, I don't think it's appropriate to have devices in classrooms that there is no discussion about it, and kids can pull them in and out to their mind's delight. Because the bottom line is that we have very persuasive research that of course kids are going to ignore the task at hand when the internet is available to them, right? I mean, I have a problem with that, right? The internet is available to me, and since my job is on the internet, I sometimes, have to stop myself from, spending 3 hours, researching, Soviet political tactics in Czechoslovakia. That's what happens when you're a history nerd, right? But that open discussion where adults and kids together are saying, "Man, these devices are sure powerful, but sometimes that power comes with great responsibility." That's where I think a lot of that magic happens, and I'm glad to see that more of that discussion is happening. I hadn't put 2 and 2 together in regards to the Anya's the author of The Art of Screen Time, but I read that book right when it came out because it was featured on the Note to Self podcast on WNYC, and a fascinating book, and it captures the notion really well of that, like, should you ban screen time in your home? Well, it's complicated, right? Like, of course you should ban screen time when it's time for the screens to go away, but it's never been a yes or no question, never will be a yes or no question.
We've got lots of kids that have struggled with college freedom, in many ways. And now you've got screen freedom, right? So it could be gaming, it could be all kinds of things.
Yep.
I saw a video recently, and I'll see if I can go back and find it, but it was a teacher talking about professional courtesy. And it was this idea that you go what I would call half-mast, where you pull the screen down half so you can't see it, or you go apples up, you turn over your device, but it wasn't about, hey, everybody needs to pay attention. It's, hey, okay, it's time for professional courtesy, whether it's to the teacher or to a fellow student, that it's time now to focus on that person, not because what you have on your screen is not important, but because what that person has to say right now is important. And it was just, okay, we're gonna have professional courtesy right now. Please give me professional courtesy. Please give, your fellow student professional courtesy. And I just thought that was a great way to describe that process, more than get off your screens, close your laptops. I just thought that brought together all the elements of what we're trying to teach kids. So that's something I'm going to start using inside of my teaching and try to convey to my faculty as well.
Right. And I would all
go ahead, Wes. Yeah, please share that link if you can find it.
And I would also add to that I admit a bit of a bias here. I used to not like it, so especially when I first started teaching, when teachers wouldn't stand in line in the cafeteria. The cut in line folks that go to the beginning of the line. And I always ask myself, why is it the case? I never understood that. And in fact, if you stand in line with kids, weird things happen. They start to talk to you, right? And they have a conversation with you that's outside of that piece. But I really think that schools probably do owe it to students to also be talking about internally the appropriate use of cell phones. I have not had the opportunity to have to sit in a faculty meeting as a member of the faculty since the cell phone craze came into light. But my guess is if you walk into the typical faculty meeting, there's an awful lot of noses and phones. I think part of that is, creating good, efficient faculty meetings, which has always been part of my own shtick personally. But the other piece of it is that, if we expect that out of kids, right? I like that notion of the professional courtesy. I think it's a really great way of putting that. And, at risk of sounding cliche, that teaches an important life lesson too, right? Like, at some point, it's companies that are tackling with this problem are going to create rules like that. Like, we need to be able to have 15 minutes in the morning where everyone puts their phone down. We talk through the day together, and then, do what we need to do. And I like that. I think that's a very clever construct to use with kids.
Shout out to Michael Goldhaber, his wonderful article from years ago called The Attention Economy. We do not live in an information economy. Economies are defined by what is scarce, not what is plentiful. And information is plentiful, attention is scarce. Therefore, one of the best gifts we can give to someone is our full attention, be that our spouse, significant other, or child, grandparent, whatever, or our teacher. So Good stuff. I'm going to mention quickly, and then we need to do Geeks of the Week and wrap up. Big news from Flickr. All right. I've been a Flickr user for a long time. I got tens of thousands of pictures on Flickr. Really glad that SmugMug bought Flickr back in maybe April, earlier part of this year. But now they've gone ahead and decided that you can only have 1,000 photos on a free account. Although, and I think maybe one of you dropped in this other article that Creative Commons images will live on if you've licensed them earlier. You can't just change all your images now to Creative Commons. But where you're going to need to pay to be a pro user, but they're really looking to cultivate the community. And so big cheers were heard in the Fryer household this last week as that got announced, and I'm excited because so many Web 2.0 graveyard stories are out there with wonderful tools. Today's Meet was one of the ones more recently that bit the dust. And so, Flickr is one of the great tools from the mid 90s that has continued to live on. But it's very interesting actually to read some of the stories of how poorly Flickr, I think, encouraged innovation and really a pretty toxic culture for creativity. And, anyway, that's interesting to think about from a business standpoint as well as a school standpoint. But I'm glad SmugMug has them, and I'm glad they're going to live on. Just make sure that you update your account to a pro account by, I think, January 9th or something like that. So.
I thought of you, Wes, when I saw all of the Flickr coverage.
Oh, lost Jason.
Hey,
I just found it really interesting that basically, if I read it right, they're just going to delete any photos more than 60 or more than 1,000, right? Isn't that kind of their idea?
It sounds like until you have a pro account, so maybe the pictures are still there. So, Jason, you're back.
Hello, that was weird.
The Flickr overlords were trying to censor you.
I know, they're trying to quiet me, man. So are you satisfied, Wes, with the direction of where SmugMug is taking Flickr?
I think so. Right. I mean, I want it to be a vibrant community. I've been a pro user before. It's something I'm very comfortable paying for. I think the idea they said is, by just giving away everything, people are invested in a different way than if they're being a pro user. So I'm also thrilled that Creative Commons clause is in there, because that's one of the best things. I mean, if that was to go away, pretty much 95% of all the photo content on my blog would go away, because I've just been embedding, Creative Commons images, my own, but also those of others. So
right.
Are you feeling good about that, or you've moved over to Google Photos entirely, I guess?
Yeah. And I, in fact, canceled a couple of Flickr accounts, and I did have a lot of hopes for when Melissa Mayers took over Yahoo that she would put some energy into it. And obviously they expanded the amount of storage available, and my understanding, there were some tweaks that were added to the system that made it a more efficient tool, but it was in desperate need of some modern day maintenance that I'm hoping SmugMug can help pull off. And and I think that, speaking only for myself, but I'm guessing this is probably not an unpopular notion in this room, that, I love the free internet, and the free internet is awesome, but, the free internet also brings you tools that are here today, gone tomorrow. So for stuff I really use, I'd much prefer to invest, a nominal amount of money every month to make sure that tool is kept up, and that the creative minds that created that tool are also compensated for that, right? And I think that's a key piece of this. But yeah, I was really happy to see that they're going in that direction, because I know too many complete Flickr devotees, right? The ones that are into it are shockingly into it, and that tool would be a real loss if that just disappeared someday with the massive media archives to go along with it.
So what is the age? What's the Flickr age? At what point do you hit a group of people that Flickr means nothing to them? Is that 25? Is it 18? Is it?
Yeah, good question. I don't know. Yeah, because it was a thing in the 90s, right? I mean,
yeah. And the people that survived into the 2000s, I mean, there are a lot of professional photographers are super into it for storage reasons, right? And to be able to make, semi-public and private galleries. So I know that to be the case. The people that I know that are super into it are all EdTech people. So I know at least 10 or so folks that have, a long archive in it. And I mean, I think SmugMug obviously has a commercial shtick that is quite different from Flickr, but I think the fact that they do have SmugMug has a big following in the professional photographer community means that at least for that particular community, we're made a viable tool. Honestly, with iPhotos, it's not as consistent as it probably needs to be from a cloud backup, but it's getting there. And then of course Google Photos, which I think is the neatest thing for photographs, honestly, since Flickr. For most people, I imagine it's that they just don't think about it. It just happens, and photos are saved forever and ever and ever. Amen.
Yep.
All right, we are a little bit off the top of the hour, so I think we need to do some Geeks of the Week, and we need to wrap it up. Jason Kern, would you like to share some Geeks of the Week with us first?
Yeah, so I tossed a couple things in there on the VR front. If you don't know that Unity gives free licenses for schools, there's actually a little application, but everyone I've talked to that has put in a legitimate application from an educational institution has gotten free Unity licenses, which is a really cool offering to have such a professional item for free for students. And then talked a little bit about Raspberry Pi, but if you're into Raspberry Pi or just looking into it, the Raspberry Pi projects page is a really, really neat and cool place to find some extension ideas of what you can do with a $35 computer.
Awesome. My Geek of the Week is OneTab. I have a link in there to an example. I don't know. I'm still not sure if this is what I want to do forever in terms of sharing. It's a little bit contrary to how I've done. But anyway, I'm doing a little newsletter on Sunday nights, and I'm recording a video, and it's out there for a week free, and then it's in this library that people can subscribe to. Anyway, I do the show notes of that. Actually, I just do the whole thing really quick because I don't want to spend too much time in Chrome with all these tabs. And so sometimes that's like 15 tabs. And so OneTab, I think I learned about it from Eric Kurtz. If you don't follow Eric Kurtz out of Ohio, he is the Google Yoda. There's a lot of them, but anyway, he's phenomenal. And so anyway, OneTab is free, and you can use it to collapse all your tabs and restore them, but you can also name them, and then you can choose to make a public web page of them to be able to share. And then the link I think I gave in the example now, this is an update. It actually has all of the OneTab shares that you've done. So it's a web page that's got every single one. So if you're using that, as I am for like an ongoing project, kind of cool. So, and it's totally free. Jason Neiffer.
This is a follow-up from the tool I shared probably 10, 11 episodes ago, but my goal has always been to find a great way to access my text messages, my phone-based text messages on the web, so I don't have to have a phone with me, especially during the day at work when I have a constant barrage of very important text messages going on with my spouse. And I had previously been using the Messages app, the native Messages app on Android, but it was just turning too wonky and it didn't always connect. And I also didn't like that I was locked into that SMS client, which also doesn't work super great on my carrier T-Mobile. But I found one that last week that has turned out to be absolutely stunning and solves two big problems for me. The first, it's called Pulse, and it's a great SMS client. It's a great thing about Android. You can chuck any of the standard apps in Android and go with something else if you don't like what the stock app looks like. But this replaces your messaging app on Android, and not only does it allow web-based access to your messages, it also automatically archives them to the cloud. You pay a one-time price of $10. It gives you lifetime subscription to the service, and all you need to do to get all your text messages back is to, after you wipe your phone or get a new phone, download the Pulse app, sign in. It restores all of your previous messages, so they're constantly being uploaded to the cloud, and they have a wonderful web-based app that you can utilize to text from other devices, including tablets. So it's the Pulse SMS app in the Google Play Store, and I've only been using it for about a week now, but it's already kind of changed the way I engage with my phone.
Will you be getting a new Pixel phone, by the way?
I wish I really want one, but I have to say I've decided that for a little while I'm going to stick with phones that have removable batteries. So I'm still using my LG V20, which is a 2-year-old smartphone that recently received the Android Oreo update. So that's last year's update. Finally came to this phone this year, and I've got a nice felt case for it. And I've decided that despite my love of changing phones about every 13-14 minutes, I think I'm going to stick with this one for a while and see where that goes.
Jason Kern, are you a happy iPhone 10 user, or what are you packing these days?
There's
my...
Look at that, the notch. All right. I do wish that iOS 12 didn't actually degrade my battery a little bit there on the iPhone 6, but
yeah,
probably time for me to upgrade. All right, well, it is time for us to close the show. Jason Kern, where can folks find you online if you are not being an amazing guest on a Wednesday night podcast?
Easiest place to catch me is on Twitter at Jason M. Kern.
Very good. Mr. Knifer, Dr. Knifer, how could I possibly forget the official title?
Why, thank you. So usually people only call me that to mock me, but the you can find me on Twitter at TechSavvyTeach. You can also see my work on the NCC Tech Savvy Teacher blog.ncc.org. And as a reminder, registration is now open for the NCC conference in fabulous Seattle, Washington, the end of February this year. ncc.org/conference19 for more information about that event, where you can see me and many of my partners in crime speak on various issues of the day.
And I don't know if I'd revealed this, but rumor is there was an Oklahoma City technology director accepted for NCCE, and said person has not booked airline tickets, but I think that will be in the cards to trek up there. So
super excellent.
Look forward to maybe a live show together. So you can find me on Twitter at WFryer. My blog is speedofcreativity.org. Jason Kern may know this, but we're doing digital citizenship stuff for school at digcit.us, and we are going to be sharing a chapel talk, our school psychologist and I, on Monday, that's going to talk about screen time and wellness. So we're trying to encapsulate some of these messages in some short, catchy phrases, and then we're going to give a screen time fasting challenge to students and families to try it on a weekend, to do a 3-hour fasting challenge. So anyway, though, we'll probably have the video of that up as well as some slides. So this has been the EdTech Situation Room. We appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much, Peggy George, for joining us, is also sharing some links. We've got some additional links that have been dropped in. Jason put the professional courtesy video from Edutopia, April 14th, 2017 in there. I want to encourage everybody to check out those show notes at edtechsr.com/links. Please join us again if you can live. If you have joined us asynchronously, let us know. Give us a shout out. Follow us on Twitter at edtechsr. Reach out to any of us on the show. We'd love to hear from you, and would love to hear any feedback, questions that you may have, or topics that you would like to hear us address in the future. So until next time, stay savvy, be safe, everyone, and monitor that screen time. Yeah, what are you guys doing watching the screen? Turn this thing off.
See you guys.